4,000 years ago, on a flat plain in the land of Shinar, every human being on earth spoke one language, and they made a decision. They looked up at the sky, and they said to one another, "Let us build a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves. Let us reach the sky on our own, without him." Now, I want to be careful here, because I am not going to tell you the Bible predicted artificial intelligence. It did not. The Bible is not a book of technology forecasts. It never mentions computers, never mentions algorithms, never mentions the things sitting in your pocket right now that can answer almost any question you ask it in under 2 seconds. But the Bible recorded something far more unsettling than a prediction. It recorded the pattern. It wrote down, in plain, ancient language, exactly what happens every single time when humanity stands together and says those same 4 words: "We can do this ourselves." And this year, for the first time in recorded history, something happened that should make every one of us stop and pay attention. A major research group surveyed practicing Christians across the country, and 48% of them, nearly half, said they now trust artificial intelligence to help them grow spiritually. 1 in 3 said that the guidance they get from the machine is as trustworthy as the guidance they get from their own pastor. And among people under 40, those numbers climb even higher. Almost half of young Christians say a machine speaks to their soul as reliably as a shepherd of their church. We are standing on the plain of Shinar again, and most of us do not even know it. Because there is a detail buried in the story of that tower, one Hebrew word, hidden inside a pun that almost no English reader ever sees, that tells you exactly why the whole thing came crashing down. And it tells you exactly what is about to happen to all of us who keep reaching for a machine to give us something a machine was never built to give. But to see it, we have to go back. Back to the plain. Back to the bricks. So let me set the scene the way the Bible sets it, because the details matter more than you think. Genesis chapter 11 opens just after the flood. Noah's descendants have multiplied. They are spreading across the earth, and they come to a wide plain in a region the Bible calls Shinar, which scholars place in ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. And here is the first thing the text tells you. The whole earth had one language and the same words, one tongue, one vocabulary. Total, frictionless communication. Think about what that means for a moment. No translation, no misunderstanding, no barrier between one mind and another. Every person on earth could share every idea instantly and perfectly. It was, in the most literal sense, the most connected humanity has ever been. We tend to read past that detail, but the writer of Genesis put it first on purpose. Before he tells you what they built, he tells you what they had. Perfect unity, perfect communication. And that is not an accident, because the whole tragedy of this story hinges on what they chose to do with a gift that good. They had the one thing every generation since has dreamed of: total understanding between human beings. No friction, no loss, and they took that gift and pointed it away from God instead of toward Him. Keep that in your mind, because in a few minutes we are going to talk about a new kind of connection humanity just built. A new universal language. And the question is going to be exactly the same as it was on that plain. Now that we can do almost anything, what are we going to point it at? And what did they do with all that connection? They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Read that again slowly, because there are 3 things hiding in that one sentence, and each one matters. First, a tower with its top in the heavens. They wanted to reach the sky. They wanted to climb, by their own engineering, with their own hands, using their own materials, all the way up to where God lives. Second, let us make a name for ourselves. This is the heart of it. Not a name given to them, a name they would manufacture for themselves. In the ancient world, to make a name was to secure immortality, to become like the gods, to be remembered forever on your own terms. They were not just building a structure, they were building a way to become divine without God. Third, lest we be scattered. God had told humanity, all the way back in Genesis, to fill the earth, to spread out, to multiply across the whole world. And here they are saying the opposite. We will stay here. We will centralize. We will resist the very thing God designed us for, and we will do it together. Notice the defiance folded into that. It is not just ambition. It is a direct reversal of a command. God said, "Spread out and fill the earth." They said, "No. We will gather in one place and build up instead." The first recorded act of mass human cooperation in the Bible after the flood is a coordinated decision to do the opposite of what God asked. So this is not a story about ancient people being bad at architecture. This is a story about the oldest temptation there is, the same one whispered in the garden by the serpent. You can be like God, and you can do it yourself. That is the seed of it. Eden whispered it to one couple. Babel organized it into a construction project for the entire human race. And every generation since has found a new way to say the same thing. Now, here is where it gets fascinating. Because the people of Shinar had a name for what they were building, and the Bible plays a game with that name that you completely miss in English. They called it Babel. And if you were a Babylonian, you would have heard that name as something glorious. The Babylonians understood their city's name as bab-ili, which means, in their language, the gate of God, the gateway to the divine, the place where earth touches heaven. That was the boast baked into the very name. We have built the gate of God, and we walked through it ourselves. But the writer of Genesis does something deliberate, something almost mischievous. He takes that proud name, Gate of God, and he links it instead to a Hebrew word that sounds almost identical, balal. And balal does not mean gate of God. Balal means to confuse, to mix up, to jumble into chaos. So the very name they chose to celebrate their triumph, Babel, the gate of God, the Bible quietly rewrites as Babel, the place of confusion. The monument to human greatness becomes, by a single pun, the monument to human chaos. The Hebrew is doing something a sermon could never do as efficiently. It is letting the name itself collapse, right there on the page, in real time. You start to say the word expecting glory, and the word turns to dust in your mouth. And this kind of wordplay is not a one-off accident in Genesis. The writer uses it again and again, because in Hebrew, the sound of a word carries meaning the way a melody carries emotion. When two words sound alike, the text is inviting you to hold them together, to feel the irony between them. Gate of God and confusion, pressed so close they are almost the same breath. That is the writer's commentary baked into the language. What humanity calls its gateway to the divine, God calls a mess. And that pun goes deeper than most people ever notice. This is the detail I promised you. Stay with me, because it is remarkable. In the Hebrew text, when the people are building, they say to one another, "Come, let us make bricks." The Hebrew word for brick is levena, and its core consonant sounds are l, b, n. That is the sound of their pride, the sound of their technology, the sound of the thing they made with their own hands. L, b, n. Brick. And then, a few verses later, when God responds, the text says he came to confuse their language. The Hebrew word for that confusion is built on the sound n-bul, nabal, the exact same three sounds as brick, just reversed. Do you see it? The Hebrew is showing you, in the very architecture of the words, what God does. He takes LBN, the brick, the tool, the proud human achievement, and he flips it, he reverses it into NBL, confusion. The thing they were most proud of becomes the very shape of their downfall. Their technology, turned backward, becomes their chaos. Hold on to that, because it is going to matter enormously in a minute. And then there is the line that I think is the most quietly devastating sentence in the whole story. Genesis 11, verse 5. They have built their tower. Its top is supposedly in the heavens. It is the tallest thing humanity has ever made. And the Bible says, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built." He came down. Sit with that for 1 second. They built a tower so tall they believed it reached heaven. They were certain they had closed the gap between earth and the divine, and the God of the universe had to come down to see it. Their greatest, tallest, most ambitious achievement. The structure they were sure had touched the sky was so far beneath heaven that the Almighty had to descend just to get a look at it. It is almost gentle in its irony. There was no fortress he had to breach, no army he had to defeat. He simply came down, the way you might bend down to look at a sand castle a child built on the beach and is convinced reaches the clouds. And do not miss what that tells you about the gap between us and God. We measure our progress against each other. The tallest building, the fastest chip, the smartest machine. We compare ourselves to the last thing we made and feel like we are climbing. But the distance between the highest human achievement and the throne of God is not a distance you close by building higher. A tower twice as tall would have made no difference. A tower reaching the literal clouds would have made no difference. The gap is not a matter of height. It is a matter of kind. And no amount of brick, no amount of code, no amount of processing power changes the kind of thing we are. He still has to come down. He always has to come down. That is not an insult to human achievement. It is simply the truth about where wisdom and divinity actually live. And it is the truth Babel forgot. The first-century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, writing about 2,000 years ago, described this tower as an act of open defiance against God, organized by a proud tyrant named Nimrod, built specifically so that humanity would never again be dependent on the heavens. Think about that motive for a moment, because Josephus puts his finger on something. The goal was independence from God, never again to need the heavens, to be self-sufficient, self-saving, self-sustaining. And archaeologists have actually found ancient evidence of these massive stepped temple towers, called ziggurats in Babylon. There is a carved black stone called the Tower of Babel stele, dating to the time of King Nebuchadnezzar II, around 600 years before Christ, that shows one of these towers in detail. These were real structures, real human attempts to build a staircase to the divine. The pattern is not a fairy tale. It is etched in stone, and it is buried in the sand of Iraq, waiting for anyone willing to look. So here is the picture. The most connected humanity has ever been. One language, one purpose, unlimited shared knowledge, all of it pointed at a single goal: build our own way up to God, make ourselves divine, do it without Him. Let me put that in language that might land a little closer to home. Babel was humanity's first server farm. One language, one protocol, one people, one network. Total processing power, perfectly coordinated, zero communication loss. And they aimed every bit of that capacity at the same objective: reach heaven without God. Build the gate of God ourselves, and it collapsed into confusion. Now look at where we are standing, because we just built a bigger one. We have created the most powerful information system in the history of our species. We can ask it anything. It answers in seconds. It has read more books than any human could read in 10,000 lifetimes. It speaks every language at once, and stop on that for a second, because it is almost too on the nose. The one thing humanity lost at Babel was a single shared language. Confusion was the curse. And what have we just built? A machine that translates every language into every other language instantly, that speaks to a farmer in one country and a student in another in their own tongues at the same moment. We have, in a strange and partial way, rebuilt the thing we lost on the plain of Shinar, not by returning to God, but by engineering our way around the curse. And nearly half of us are now turning to that machine and asking it the deepest questions of the human soul. How do I find peace? How do I grow closer to God? What is the meaning of what I am going through? Should I forgive Him? Should I stay? Is there hope for me? We are on the plane again. Same posture, same confidence. We have gathered our knowledge, pooled it into one system, and we are reaching upward with it, reaching for meaning, for guidance, for the voice of God Himself, through a thing we built with our own hands. And the question that brought Babel down is the same question hanging over us right now. Where does wisdom actually come from? If this is making you see the headlines differently, if you want the ancient pattern underneath the news, subscribe. We decode the story behind the story every single week, because the Bible does not leave that question hanging. Babel asks it. But there is another book, older, stranger, written by a man who lost everything, that answers it. And the answer is the most important thing you will hear today. His name was Job. You know the broad strokes. Job was a righteous man who lost his children, his wealth, his health, everything in a matter of days. And he spends most of the book sitting in ashes, scraping his sores with a piece of broken pottery, arguing with friends who insist they have it all figured out. His friends are, in their own way, a lot like a machine. They have answers for everything. Quick, confident, tidy answers. You suffered because you sinned. Fix your behavior and your life will improve. They have endless information about how God supposedly works, and almost none of it is actually wise. They have da'at without chokhmah, and it makes them worse than useless to a man who is actually suffering. But right in the middle of the book, in chapter 28, the argument stops. And Job does something unexpected. He stops complaining, and he writes a poem. Many scholars consider this poem the very heart of the entire book of Job, the still point around which the whole storm of the book turns. And it is a poem about exactly one thing: where wisdom comes from. Listen to how it begins. Job talks about mining. He describes how human beings dig into the earth to find silver, how they refine gold, how they cut shafts deep into the rock, dangling and swaying in places no foot has ever walked, tearing open mountains, searching the darkest depths of the planet to pull out precious stones and metal. He talks about how we put an end to darkness, how we probe the farthest recesses, how we overturn mountains by their roots and cut channels through rock, and our eyes see every precious thing. It is, frankly, one of the most stirring descriptions of human capability anywhere in ancient literature. He is describing human ingenuity at its absolute peak, the drive to dig, to extract, to discover, to find what is hidden and drag it up into the light. Job is genuinely impressed by us. He is not mocking human achievement. He is in awe of it. And then, after celebrating all that human capability, Job stops and asks the question that breaks the whole thing open. But where can wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Here is his point. Humanity can find silver. We can find gold. We can find sapphires and onyx and every buried treasure in the crust of the earth. We have always been brilliant at extraction. We can dig out anything. Except this one thing. Job says the deep itself says, "It is not in me." The sea says, "It is not with me." It cannot be bought with gold or weighed out in silver. You can mine the entire planet down to its molten core, and you will never strike a vein of wisdom. It is the one treasure that is not buried anywhere on earth. And to understand why that matters so much for us, right now, I have to show you two Hebrew words. Because English uses one word, knowledge, where Hebrew uses two. And the difference between them is the difference between everything. The first word is da'at. Da'at means knowledge, information, data, facts, the accumulation of things known. If you know that water boils at a certain temperature, that is da'at. If you can list every king of Israel in order, that is da'at. If you can recite the date of every battle in human history, that is da'at. The second word is chokhmah. Chokhmah is usually translated wisdom, but it means something much deeper than having information. Chokhmah is the skill of living. It is knowing what to do with what you know. It is the difference between knowing what a word means and knowing what to say to your child when they are crying at midnight. Da'at is knowing the facts. Chokhmah is knowing how to live. In fact, the Hebrew uses chokhmah to describe the skill of a master craftsman, the artisan who can look at raw materials and know exactly what to make and how. Wisdom in the Bible is not abstract. It is the practical, lived-in, hands-on skill of building a good life out of the raw material God gives you. You cannot get that from a fact sheet. You get it the way a craftsman gets his skill, slowly, through relationship, through practice, through reverence for the master who teaches him. Now hold those two words up against the machine. Artificial intelligence is the single most powerful dot engine ever constructed. It is Babel's dream finally realized. All the world's information, one language, instantly accessible. Ask it any fact, and it will give you the answer faster than you can finish the question. In terms of dot, it is almost limitless. It can summarize every book ever written on grief. It can list every verse in the Bible about forgiveness. It can describe, in perfect detail, what every major theologian in history believed about the soul. But da'at is not chokhmah. Here is what I mean, and I want you to really feel this. A search engine can tell you, in half a second, exactly how many people died in every war in human history. It can give you the casualty figures, the dates, the generals, the treaties. That is staggering da'at. But that same machine cannot tell you how to forgive the person who hurt you. It cannot sit with you in the silence after a funeral and know when to speak and when to just be there. It cannot tell you whether to stay in the marriage or whether to finally let go. It cannot give you the courage to apologize, or the patience to wait, or the strength to keep loving someone who keeps disappointing you. It can define forgiveness in 19 languages. It cannot forgive. It can explain courage. It cannot make you brave. That is chokhmah, and it has never, not once, come from a machine. It has never come from a tower, either. It did not come from the brick and the bitumen on the plain of Shinar, and it does not come from the silicon and the data centers of today. The material changed. The dream did not, and neither did the answer. So Job mines the whole earth and comes up empty. The deep does not have wisdom. The sea does not have it. Gold cannot buy it. And after 27 verses of searching everywhere a human being could possibly look, Job finally arrives at the answer. It is verse 28, and it is one of the most important sentences in the entire Bible. And he said to man, "Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding." The fear of the Lord. In Hebrew, yirat, Y-H-W-H. And I need to clear something up immediately, because the word fear throws people off. Yirat does not mean being scared of God, cowering, terrified that lightning is about to strike. That is not the picture at all. Yirat means awe, reverence, the deep, breath-catching wonder at who God is. It is the feeling you get standing at the edge of the ocean at night, or under a sky so full of stars it makes you small. It is reverence so deep, it reorganizes how you live. And do you see why that is the answer? Because awe is the one thing a machine can never give you and never feel. You can ask a machine to define the ocean, to calculate its depth, to list every species in it. It will do all of that flawlessly, but it will never stand at the shore and feel small. It will never be moved. Awe is not information. It is a response of the whole person to something greater than themselves. And wisdom, the Bible says, begins there. It begins in the posture of a creature standing before its Creator and being genuinely, gladly overwhelmed. Knowledge puffs you up. Awe makes you small. And it turns out that the small are the ones who become wise. This is the exact opposite of Babel. Babel was the refusal of awe. It was humanity saying, "We will not look up in wonder. We will build up in pride. We will not be small before God. We will make ourselves big enough to reach Him." And that posture, the refusal to be small, the determination to climb, is precisely the posture that cannot receive wisdom. Because chokhmah only ever flows downhill, from a God who comes down, into the open hands of people humble enough to look up. And that is the answer to the whole thing. That is what Babel never understood, and what 48% of us are about to learn the hard way. Chokhmah, the wisdom you actually need to live, to suffer well, to love, to forgive, to know what to do when the path forward is dark. That kind of wisdom is not a thing you can download. It is not data you can extract. It is not information you can mine out of the earth or pull out of a machine. It comes from a relationship. It comes from awe. It comes from knowing the one who made you. You cannot build a tower tall enough to reach it. You cannot engineer your way up to it. The people of Babel tried, and God had to come down just to see how far short they fell. And that is the most beautiful part of this entire story, and it is where I want to leave you. If this is landing for you, do me a favor and leave a comment. Tell me, where do you go for wisdom when the screen cannot help? When the answer you need is not a fact you can look up. I read every single one. And before I give you the 3 things to carry out of this, let me name the moment where all of this actually gets tested. It is not in a sermon. It is not in a comment section. It is at 2 o'clock in the morning. It is when you are lying awake in the dark, and the question will not let you sleep. Should I stay, or should I go? Should I forgive him, or protect myself? What do I do about the diagnosis, the debt, the child who will not speak to me, the future I cannot see? That is the moment. And in that moment, almost all of us now have the same first instinct. Reach for the phone. Reach for the machine. Ask it. It is right there on the nightstand, glowing, endlessly patient, infinitely informed. And it will give you an answer. That is the trap. It will give you a fluent, confident, well-organized answer assembled from everything humanity has ever written. Pure dot. And you will feel, for a moment, like you have been helped. But you will not be wiser, because the thing you needed at 2 in the morning was never more information. It was chokhmah, the steadying, soul-deep knowing that only comes from awe, from prayer, from relationship with the God who actually holds your life in his hands. The machine can hand you the whole library. It cannot hand you peace. Because here is what I want you to carry with you this week. 3 things. First, Babel is not just an old story. It is the pattern. It is what humanity does in every generation. We gather our knowledge, we pool our power, and we try to build our own way up to heaven without God. The bricks change. In Shinar, it was mud and tar. In our century, it is silicon and data. But the blueprint is identical. Take the best of what we can make and aim it at the sky, and try to close the gap between us and the divine by our own effort. And every time, it ends the same way. Not because God is threatened by our towers. He is not. He came down to Babel as easily as you would step off a curb. But because the thing we are reaching for was never at the top of a tower in the first place. Artificial intelligence is simply the newest, tallest tower. It is magnificent at da'at. It will never give you chokhmah. Use it for what it is, and refuse to ask it for what it cannot give. Second, there is a difference between knowing things and knowing how to live. And that difference is the whole game. The machine can hand you all the information in the world and leave you more lost than when you started. Information is not formation. Data is not wisdom. We are the most informed generation in human history, and arguably one of the most anxious. And that is not a coincidence. We have mistaken the endless availability of da'at for the presence of chokhmah. And the two were never the same. The answer to your deepest question this week is almost certainly not something you can search for. It is something you have to seek, and those are different verbs. You search a database. You seek a person. Wisdom is sought in prayer, in scripture, in awe, in stillness, in relationship with the God who actually holds Chokhmah in his hands and gives it, the book of James says, generously to anyone who simply asks. Third, and this is the one I want you to fall asleep thinking about tonight. The people of Babel spent everything trying to climb up to God. They stacked their bricks. They reversed their own technology into chaos. And God still had to come down to find them. And here is the gospel hiding inside this ancient story. God has always been the one who comes down. He came down at Babel. He came down to Abraham, to Moses at the burning bush, to a wandering people in a wilderness. And then, in the most staggering descent of all, he came all the way down to a manger in Bethlehem, God himself, not waiting at the top of a tower for us to climb, but arriving as an infant at the bottom, in a feeding trough, in the dark, among animals. The entire message of the Bible runs in the opposite direction of Babel. Babel is humanity climbing up. The gospel is God coming down. One is a staircase we build and fall off of. The other is a rescue that arrives while we are still stacking bricks. You do not have to build your way up to him. You never did. While you were busy reaching, he was already on his way down to you. So this week, when you have a question, and you will, notice your first instinct. Notice how fast your hand reaches for the machine, and before you do, just for a moment, remember the plain of Shinar. Remember the tower that did not reach. Remember the brick that became confusion. Remember that the wisdom you are actually hungry for was never going to come from something you built, no matter how tall, no matter how clever, no matter how many languages it speaks. There is nothing wrong with the machine. Ask it your factual questions. Let it summarize, translate, organize, calculate. That is what DOT is for, and it is good at it. But the moment your question turns from what is true to how do I live, the moment you are no longer asking for a fact but for a way through, close the screen. That question has an older and better answer. It always has. It comes from the one who came down. Ask him. God bless you. And the next time you reach for an answer, remember the one who already came down to give it.